Well, good afternoon and welcome to our guests. Our first capstone this afternoon is by Heinen, and this is his thesis statement. This project demonstrates the making of a functional knife and sheath, integrating both traditional and modern knife-making techniques to showcase craftsmanship, material science, and the artistry involved in transforming raw steel into a durable, practical tool. Please welcome Nicholas.
Throughout the course of human history, man has relied upon tools to make work faster, easier, and cheaper. As one should easily notice, these tools constantly evolve into new inventions. Whether it be the horse being replaced by the Model T, the radio by the television, or even the sword being replaced by the musket, all tools seem to be replaced eventually. However, there is one tool that has existed since the Stone Ages that has not been replaced, nor likely ever will. This tool, of course, being the knife. The function of a knife is simple: divide one thing into more than one thing. While we as human beings tend to take the knife for granted, its use in the lives of every single person in this room is simply unquestionable. With all this said, there is significant difference in how the knives of the past were made and how knives can be made today. When I tell people that I handcrafted a knife for myself, I often get comments asking about hammers, anvils, forges, and all sorts of blacksmithing materials. While modern blacksmithing is still a unique and beautiful knife building process, this is not what I have done to create the work that you see today. Rather, my process is a completely and totally unique knife building experience as compared to traditional blacksmithing. My location of work was in no forge, but rather a shack attached to the Buckhorn Taxidermy Studio in Eunice, Louisiana, affectionately referred to by my mentor as the dirtiest knife-making shop in Louisiana. My mentor was not your typical educated forger, but a self-taught mastermind who was able to convey his lessons better than any master or teacher ever could. So without further ado, I present to you all the process of building a knife the Ben Bischoff way. The first step in this process is to decide a shape for the knife. This is done on a piece of paper. I personally decided to make a skinning knife, as my previous knife used for such a purpose had been ruined in my travels in senior pilgrimage. I then cut out the shape and placed it upon a similarly sized slab of metal, which is then marked by the outline of the shape. The metal used for this project is 440C stainless steel. This alloy is a popular pick among knife makers due to its excellent hardness and wear resistance. Additionally, this metal is incredibly resistant to the elements due to its composition of iron, chromium, carbon, nickel, and manganese. Using 440C stainless steel means that the knife is much more low maintenance than a knife made of non-stainless alloys, which oxidize and rust much faster. Next, I place the block of steel upon a bandsaw. Bandsaws are incredible for cutting through metal using a process called shearing. Shearing uses the saw's teeth to create friction and slowly slice through metal. The teeth can avoid being sheared away by being spread across a 56-inch band. As one can easily imagine, 56 inches of steel will heat much slower than half a centimeter of steel. Cutting is complete when a rough shape of the knife is created. The knife is then transported to a belt sander, where precision shaping will occur. A belt sander is a large power tool used to shape metal by using a lengthy continuous loop of abrasive sandpaper that moves at a high speed around spinning wheels, similar to how tank treads work. A belt sander has a rounded edge, which means that less of the surface area of the metal is actually being shaved off. This allows for the smooth curves seen in the handle of the knife. Due to the intense heat caused by the sandpaper rubbing against the metal, extreme caution must be used to avoid the burning of fingers. The steel must be constantly dipped in water to cool off, at around 2 times every minute and a half. The heat produced by friction spreads throughout the entirety of the steel, potentially burning the fingers slowly without the user realizing. In my personal experience, I accidentally touched the side which had just been sheared, only to jump in pain and stare at my blistering, bubbling thumb, which appeared to be smoking. After the desired shape is cut out, the belt on the machine is swapped into a new belt that has a finer grit. A grit in a belt sander is a term used to describe how small, dense, and abrasive the particles in a belt are. For example, a lower grit, such as 60, would be good for shaving away large amounts of steel to form a general shape. After this is done, the numbers on the grit must keep increasing to smoothen the steel and remove all imperfections. The higher the number of the belt, the more dense and small the particles used for abrasion will be. After the knife's shape has been finished and polished, it's time to drill the holes for the pins using a table drill press. A diamond drill bit is used to drill through the entirety of the steel. My knife has 7 holes within the handle, 5 of which are not visible in the final project and will be discussed later, and 2 of which are used for pins. I then file down 3 small notches with the metal file. These notches are not necessary, but can contribute to personal style preferences due to the assistance it can bring in preventing slipping. The shape of the knife is now finalized, and I am ready to heat treat the knife. Heat treatment is an operation or combination of operations that involves the heating and cooling of a solid metal or alloy for the purpose of obtaining greatly increased hardness, strength, wear resistance, and improved corrosion resistance. This hardness stems from the production of a marsenite microstructure. According to expert material science engineers, marsenite is a supersaturated solid solution of carbon and iron, characterized by a body-centered tetragonal crystal structure, which is formed by a diffusionless transformation when austenite is randomly cooled. This may sound complicated, so I'll put it in simpler terms. Marsenite is a hardened steel structure that forms when hot stainless steel, such as my 440C, is quickly cooled. During this cooling, the atoms that make up the metal do not have the time to rearrange into the original structure they started in. The atoms lock into a strained and tightly packed arrangement. If done correctly, the metal's strength and durability is now greatly increased. For 440C stainless steel, this transformation is incredibly important because it's what gives the metal the strength, hardness, and wear resistance it needs to survive as a usable practical tool. Even though 440C may be less rich in carbon compared to other 440 grades, marsenite is still formed, providing the corrosion-resistant material I need for the use and abuse of the knife's lifetime. As for what the knife was heat treated in, I used an Everheat heat treatment oven. The oven was able to be heated to extreme temperatures of up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The next step is a repeat of the belt sanding process. The metal is too hard to be shaved, but the burnt texture around it can be removed. After polishing, the knife is ready to be attached to the handle. The wood selected for my handle is from a South American tree called Coco Bolo. From the outside, Coco Bolo seems to be a regular tree. However, when cut open, Coco Bolo reveals a striking interior of deep reds and browns with irregular streaks, giving the wood a dramatic marbled appearance. Due to Coco Bolo also being durable enough to survive extended use, it is prized among knife makers for its unique beauty and charm. In order to attach the handle permanently to the knife, 2 blocks of Coco Bolo are grinded by a tool similar to a belt sander, but designed specifically for wood. However, this grit is used to roughen up the surface of wood instead of smoothing it. The purpose of roughening the wood is to prepare it for the epoxy used to attach the knife. Epoxy resins are thermosetting polymers that, when mixed with a curing agent, undergo a chemical reaction to form a rigid, cross-linked material with high strength and adhesion. While this definition also may sound complicated, I will summarize it quickly once more. Epoxy is a type of glue that works particularly well when applied to wood due to its ability to seep into the fibers of the wood, which is why I needed to roughen up the wood before attaching it. The wood is then pressed into the steel, where the epoxy seeps into the big holes that I drilled into the handle part of the knife, while the small holes are connected with the metal pins I showed you earlier. The knife is then sandwiched between the wood as the epoxy dries, turning it into a solid that unites wood and steel. After the Coco Bolo is securely attached to the knife, the handle must be shaved down to fit a human hand. The belt sander must be used one last time to remove all the excess epoxy, wood, and pins. The same process that was used to shape the knife is now used upon the wood, which now emits a pleasant scent similar to tobacco due to the natural resins which reside in the wood. I was able to custom make my handle to have bulges in the middle of it, which fits slightly better into my large palms. The process was arguably the most beautiful in the entire knife making experience. exposing layer upon layer of the gorgeous wood couldn't help but make me wonder of the grandeur of the Creator, who himself made this beautiful world in which I happened to attempt to make a tool in. Finally, the time had come to sharpen the knife, transforming a beautiful dull piece of steel into a beautiful sharp tool. I am given sharpening stones, which are doused in WD-40. I then slowly and gently rub the edge of my knife against the stone, gently dragging a little bit of metal off due to the precise roughness of the stone. I then take the other side of it and rub it against the stone, creating a sharp ridge in the middle of the edge of the blade. After being done about 20 times, the knife is now sharp. So sharp, in fact, that I could rub the edge against the hair on my arm and perfectly shave the hairs off without any effort. That's how it was wrinkled. Please do this paper real quick. The final stage of my capstone project is the construction of a sheath for my knife. The sheath I made is custom built and will only ever work for the knife I have crafted and the knife I have crafted alone. I used vegetable leather, which is soft enough to be impressed upon and folded when wet, but still retains adequate hardness when dry. The first step of crafting a sheath is to measure how much leather is needed by placing the knife upon a large sheet of leather and pressing the desired shape into the leather. After the shape is pressed into the leather, a scalpel is pressed against the table, and the leather is slid against the scalpel to cut out the shape. Once the shape is cut out, the end of the belt strap must be folded into the rest of the sheath. The tip of the strap and the leather body must be wetted so that holes may be poked through. The holes are made so that the belt loop can be sewn into the actual body of the sheath. After pressing lines between the holes to make room for the string, the belt loop is sewn onto the body of the sheath. The sheath is now ready to be sewn together. The leather is folded over a wooden dummy knife, and the form of the folding process is now wetted. The leather is refolded over the wooden dummy knife, and holes are again pressed into the outer parts of the leather. After sewing these final holes, the sheath is now technically usable. I have elected to soak the whole sheath in water and press the leather against the knife while it was in the sheath, forming a tight glove-like seal. This ensures that my knife will never escape its sheath without being forcefully pulled out. Overall, the experience of knife making gave me a greater appreciation towards many aspects in life. Never again will I be able to look at any tool the same way again, for man has relied upon tools for a reason. They can make work faster, cheaper, and more efficient. In making my knife, I felt true pride for what was taking a block of steel, wood, and an animal skin, and make a tool that looked both better and could outperform mass-produced tools someone could buy at a store. The project is not simply a knife to me. It is a testimony to my determination and passion to acquire skills that society may deem as a novelty, and transform this novelty into an item of great meaning. If I was offered $1,000 for my knife, I am sure that I would not be willing to part with it. This knife is a landmark in my journey to live my life as a successful man who has the ability and talent to work hard. Thank you.
We'll start with our faculty questions.
Ms. Broussard.
Thank you, Nick, for your presentation. I was just curious if you had some unforeseen complications during your process, and if you would share that with us and how you overcame them.
I did. There were multiple. So, first off, for creating the edge of a knife, there's this thing that the faculty will be able to see, but there's a hollow groove, which is basically designed to be able to cut better. And this was an incredibly hard process because the creation of this hollow groove is solely by feeling. You press it against the belt sander and press another piece of wood against it. So you can't see anything that you're doing, and you have to move the exact same speed the whole time. And if you can't, it's very, very visible, and the knife looks really bad. So that was very hard. The knife is slightly thinner than I thought it would be due to this process. I had to redo it once or twice. This wasn't really my fault, but the actual knife inside of it had a piece of slag in it, which once you see it, it's this black dot. You're not gonna be able to miss it. And which is basically whenever the solid piece of steel was melted down, something must have fallen in and burnt up in it. And I basically couldn't remove that, so it's just a permanent stain. So there are multiple complications, but it still turned out good.
Thank you.
Ms. Melanson.
Thank you for your presentation, Nicholas. I was wondering, and I just forgot my question. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
What happens? Oh, have you ever used any of these tools like the belt sander, the drill press, anything like that? Had you ever used any of these instruments before, or was this like your first time kind of working with those heavy duty?
So I haven't exactly used every single one of them beforehand. The ones that I had kind of used were a belt sander. At my old school, Maristella, we had table belt sanders, which were designed for wood. But these weren't as you can see, let me go back to it. So that's obviously a very large belt sander. The ones that I had used beforehand were about this big. So I've used that, and then a drill press. I've used a very small one for also the same process. It was a carpentry class.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Miss Lees.
Thank you for your presentation, Nicholas. Do you know approximately how many hours you logged in this project?
I do. So it was probably about 45 hours in total, which sounds like a lot, but it was over a long period of time because teaching me was a lot slower because, he's a taxidermist. He was busy. He had a giant alligator he was working on. So I couldn't go there every single week. But it was about 45 hours I spent there. 5 of those hours were probably just us talking, so about 45 hours.
Okay, and as a follow-up, I think whenever it is so easy to buy so many things, including knives, it seems like it could be a hard sell to convince someone to put in that kind of time and effort into making their own. So could you give maybe a pitch for why it might be beneficial for someone to make something on their own when they could buy it more easily?
So you mean a pitch for someone who is interested in learning how to build a knife to build a knife?
Sure, yeah, or something similar.
Yes, so in general, as I said at the end of my capstone, the pride of finishing a knife and finishing a knife that you made specifically, it's just hard to describe. There's just no feeling like it. The fact that, I'm not going to compare it to parenthood because, I've never been a parent, but just imagining it in a similar light, and that Mr. Ben said something like this too, but it's the fact that you created this thing, which was not easy to make, even if someone else helped you, it's just the feeling and the pride of it. And it's also just better, the quality is usually better, it's going to last your whole life. That knife is never going to, I'm always going to have it. It's never going to break. Yeah, it'll need to be sharpened, but yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Miss Ardman. Sorry.
It's okay. Okay, in your thesis, you claim that some of the techniques you use are labeled as traditional, while others are labeled as modern. So I'm wondering if you could delineate, within each of the steps, what you consider to be a traditional part of the process and what parts are considered modern and why you would categorize each as such?
Thank you for your question. So I would say obviously the modern parts are all the industrial tools, belt sanders, drill presses, what's the word? Table press, things like that. Those were all new developments, relatively new, the past probably 50 years have been made. I would say the ancient part mostly was in the leather working. So the leather that I used was something called vegetable tan, which is basically, I think Mr. Ben did this by himself. I didn't actually tan it myself, he tanned it, and I think he did it years ago. So that is a deer skin after the fur is basically peeled off. And what he did was he took this, basically what was oak resin, and there's this thing in oak resin called tannins, and he stretched it across. It's the same thing you'd see in like a Native American museum. He just stretched it across and left it in the sun. And basically everything that I did here would have been the same how Native Americans did it. I didn't have to make my own twine. I didn't have to tan it myself, but wetting it and sewing it together was pretty much the same thing. And then this is a much more minor thing, but usually for the drill press part, you take a railroad spike and a hammer, and you have to hammer it down to get an exact spot for the drill to go in. That's existed for thousands of years. It's not really advanced, so I don't know if you'd really call it ancient, so as breathing is ancient. But I hope that answers your question.
Thanks so much.
Ms. Littell.
Hey Nicholas, thank you for your presentation. Would you take $2,000 for the knife?
I don't think so.
You spoke about Mr. Ben with such affection. It makes me think of just like the apprenticeship of time long ago. Do you see yourself maybe in the future inspired to maybe offer this experience to someone else? What would that look like?
Thank you for your question. Absolutely, without a doubt, yes. It's beautiful to learn and it's beautiful to teach, as I'm sure us JPG students would understand. Just learning from him was an incredible experience, not only because he knew my dad as a kid, so I would learn all sorts of stories, and then he would teach me all sorts of things about Native Americans, but it's a relationship like no other to have someone who just loves teaching so much. And I hope someday that, whenever I have children, I can teach my children how to make their own knives. Like going back to Ms. Lisa's question, I could basically teach them how to make something difficult that is their own.
Thank you.
Do we have any senior questions?
Mr. James.
Thank you for your presentation, Nicholas. I was wondering, you mentioned the desire to pass this type of skill down on to any children you might have, and I was wondering, do you think you're going to continue this practice for yourself? Like, is there another knife you're looking at making or style?
Thank you for your question. Absolutely. The type of knife that I want to make next is similar to the Buck brand knife, which is a much more difficult shape to make. Are you familiar with what a Buck knife looks like?
A little bit, yeah.
So essentially why it's harder is because there are multiple different edges you would have to sharpen down. There's multiple different edges that you have to make on a belt sander. The only reason that I know it's possible is because Mr. Ben has made one and I wanted to do it because it looked cool. So absolutely, I completely want to make more knives and maybe even someday be able to sell them.
I'd buy one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas.